I didn't warn you.
That wimpy bell I could hardly hear.
Good afternoon. We'll start the meeting with America the Beautiful.
No, America.
America, not
Sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrims' pride. From every mountainside, let freedom ring.
Thank you.
I'd rather we didn't.
Well, we can. Can you play it?
I can do it.
Okay, next time.
Okay.
Be prepared. Well, good afternoon, everyone. You can be seated. We have one guest this afternoon as a potential member, and I dearly, dearly love him. It's Jared Underwood, and he's very special to me. Jared, would you please stand up?
Hi, Jared. Hi, Jared.
We are no relation, that's why we like each other. And then we have a potential membership in progress, and that is Karen Streeter from Sheltered Living. Welcome, Karen. And then I'd like to introduce Sharon Sullivan, who's come to talk to us regarding our September covenant.
Thank you, everyone, for having me here today. I'm representing the Topeka Center for Peace and Justice. I am director of STARS, which stands for Stop Trafficking and Reject Slavery. I have been here several other times. You've invited me to talk about the challenges that we face helping people who have been sold, who've been trafficked. Unfortunately, as you know, it is happening here in our community. It's happening to children, women, men, and we have been working really hard to help both people who have been victimized and to prevent additional victimization, especially of children. So one of the things we do is we provide support for the YWCA Center for Safety and Empowerment, the Open Door Project, Lifehouse, and others as requested. And Rotary's been crucial in helping us with several of our programs, especially the Fresh Start Kits, with the Safe Line, which is a smartphone, a disposable smartphone, because oftentimes people who are trafficked are being tracked with apps on their phones. And so we like to be able to give them another phone that they can't be tracked through them. And then the Be an Angel Project, which is very special to my heart, because the Angel Project, people can donate, and the advocates call me and say, I have a special need, something that is not covered by grants, and we get to directly help victims with the things that they need. So, for example, well, we've helped with like rent deposits. Remember being broke and having to come up with a deposit and first month's rent, right? That's impossible for people that are coming out of these kinds of victimization situations. We were able to, through the Angels, we were able to help a woman who is not from our community, but she landed in our community, and the advocate from the YWCA Center for Safety and Empowerment called me and said, this woman wants to get home. She wants to get home tomorrow, and she's calling the strip clubs right now, trying to find a place to dance tonight so she can buy a bus ticket home. And I said, she doesn't have to dance tonight because I've got Angels, and we were able to get her a bus ticket, so she was able to leave first thing in the morning. And that's because of your help, because of Rotary, and the commitment in our community to help people who have been victimized. either through human trafficking, sexual violence, domestic violence, or stalking. So my passion, we have to help people who've been victimized. We just have to. They deserve that. But my passion is on prevention and risk reduction. So we've also started a program we did the training in 2017, December 2017, where we trained 20 adults in our community to go into the schools and talk to kids about healthy relationships and exploitation and pop culture. And it's geared towards 12 to 18-year-olds. That program's called Not a Number. And the book, because it's a peer-to-peer discussion led by an adult facilitator, it's a conversation we can have with those kiddos every year. Because every year they come to see the world differently and understand their place in it differently. So that's one of the things I love about that program. I am looking for someone to give me another $4,000 because we have a pledge of $3,500 from Topeka Police Department. We want to do another training and train 20 more people. We talked to nearly 2,000 kids last year and to help them protect themselves and each other. The other program that we're actually starting on Monday, so you might see me on the red couch tomorrow. We're starting a program called Culture Reframed, and this is a program to help adults talk to their kids about pornography and hypersexualization in our culture. It's a free program online, and I've talked to the director. It's based on 40 years of research, and they framed it as pornography as a public health crisis in our country. Because the pornography that we're seeing now that's readily available on our computers is not the pornography, well, you know, my brothers couldn't wait for National Geographic with the naked breasts, right? You know, or the Playboy under my daddy's bed. It's not like that anymore. It's what we used to call gonzo porn, meaning it's very violent and extreme, and the purpose is to degrade mostly women in order to use sexual pleasure. Our kids are encountering this stuff at the average age of 11. Half the time they're not even looking for it. And I like to tell the story, I'm not going to tell the whole story, but I was doing research for costumes for a play called Moby Dick the Musical. Google that and see what comes up, right? So it's really important. One of the things we're doing to make sure that everybody can participate that wants to participate in this program is we're providing supper and childcare for 5 weeks for all the participants and their children. So that's where we're going to put the September Cup money, is to providing food and childcare for, well, food, because we've got volunteers for childcare. So that's how we're going to use the September Cup money, is to provide a meal for our attendees for the Culture Reframed. And we still have spots left, so if you're interested, please sign up. We would love to have you come and participate. And we actually hope that this is just a pilot. We're planning this as our pilot, but we want to replicate it in other neighborhoods because we feel like it's important enough that we talk to all our kids, help all our kids address these things. Because I know my parents didn't really talk to me about how to talk about this stuff. So we have to, as adults, we have to learn how to do it, even when we're not comfortable. So thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you so much for choosing us for this September Cup money, and I greatly appreciate all your help. Thanks so much.
Thanks for sharing your commitment and energy and passion with us, Sharon. Some quick announcements while I'm asking Kathleen to walk up here. Any Friend X announcements? Okay. Then just a reminder that on September 12th, we'll have our first Topeka Rotary Wine Group meeting. It's at Cruise Holidays in Brookwood Shopping Center. And you can sign up for that at the topekarotary.org or through email to Steve Knoll. The Water Festival is September 12th. This is one of our community service projects, and I think we need just a couple more volunteers for that. And that too can be on topekarotary.org if you care to participate in that. And then lastly, the Race Against Breast Cancer, and this is one of our community service projects too. We'll be helping put bags together, and we're also putting together a walk-run team. I think we need 2 more people to sign up. You don't have to run, you can walk, for us to have a club team. The applications for that are on the back table. If you sign up today, you still get it at the reduced rate. After the 6th, then it goes up $10. Then, earlier this year, our Rotary Foundation funded a project with the YWCA, and it's moving along, and so Kathleen is going to share with us the project and some of the actual hands-on work that we need, and I'll let you, Jeanette.
Thanks, Joni. First of all, I want to say we all should be very grateful that we have Sharon Sullivan in our community, because she has been a wonderful partner to the YWCA, particularly around the issues of domestic violence and human trafficking. She has a lot of expertise in this area, and we can't do this work alone. It takes our entire community to be behind this, and so we're really grateful to Sharon and to the STARS project. It is very meaningful. So to move on to where we are with this project, I think you all probably saw the press release and saw that we have a location, and it's at 1309 Huntoon. We are in the process of having some demo work done by the landlords of that property, and they are in the midst of getting some of that work done, and then we are going to be ready to get prepared to put in some flooring over there and a bathroom. Of course, it saves us money when we're working with contractors, when we can do a lot of the demo work and a lot of the painting. So we had a volunteer that put this information out, and she's a very dedicated volunteer, but a little overly ambitious. And I will just say that what you're seeing up there on the screen, please know that this is the YWCA Center for Safety and Empowerment's project. And these are just the beginning of volunteer opportunities in terms of doing this kind of work. We will be announcing very shortly that we will be providing some training opportunities for volunteers who actually want to be able to work in the day center and interact with the clients that we're going to be serving there. So we will get information out about that, but right now we're looking at the dirty work. And we are going to be asking other folks in the community to help us with that work. But if you are available on Saturday, this Saturday, September 7th, I realize it's a very short notice and people have their calendars pretty full. But there is going to be some work on that day that will be like getting cabinets torn out, floor covering pulled up, debris hauled to the dumpster, and we need you to bring your hammers, your dollies, your saws, and any tools to take up. You need vinyl flooring and wear gloves. So if you want to participate in that, let's get you signed up. Saturday, September 14th, it says cleanup and painting. The painting will be contingent upon how much the contractor gets done in terms of putting sheetrock up to expand a bathroom. So we will have more details on that, and we'll get that communicated. And then September 21st, for sure we'll be painting. So if you have any questions about that, feel free to get in contact with me as well. I appreciate Jeanette getting this information out on such a short notice. So any questions, see me afterwards. Thanks.
I don't know about you, but I'm really excited and inspired by the energy of our members here at the Topeka Rotary Club. We are indeed making a difference, and I think you should all congratulate yourselves. I think the last announcement I want to make is this afternoon at 5:30. There is the Turning Point, which is being sponsored by the Topeka Partnership, and it's an opportunity for you to share with them what you like about the changes that are occurring in Topeka, what new ideas you have, and what you don't quite like. So I would encourage you to attend. It's from 5:30 to 8. They'll feed you, and they have some outstanding speakers to also present to you about Topeka Pride, community pride. Okay, Marie, that concludes the answer.
Hello, everybody. So we pride ourselves on being flexible. And so we actually do have a slight change in the program we're doing, but I'm super excited to be able to introduce my friend who is serving with me and part of the programming team for Downtown Rotary. And this is Sherda Williams, and she is the superintendent for the Brownview Board of Education, Topeka, Kansas. And she has been our superintendent at Brown since January 20th, 2015. Prior to that, she was also the superintendent of the Garfield National Historic Site. We're talking about President Garfield. And today, she will be speaking about another opportunity that she had to bring herself to Kansas, where she was the superintendent of Nicodemus in Nicodemus, Kansas. So I am pleased to introduce Sherda Williams.
Thank you. And first of all, I'm most nervous about the fact that I'm making a public presentation without having my National Park Service Ranger outfit on. I think that's against the rules.
Secret's good with that.
As Marie mentioned, this is my second time for living and working in Kansas. I was superintendent at Nicodemus National Historic Site from 2004 to 2008. And I tell people it was one of the most challenging assignments of my life because of the isolation and the small staffing that we had there. But it also is one of the most fulfilling experiences I had because it just is a story that not a lot of people know about. It's a very much underrepresented history, but it is just incredible that it is a story that arose from Kansas because of Kansas people, and it's just a really unique history, or not unique in some ways. It's very typical of the settlement of the Great Plains, but it's unique in that it brings the voices of the authentic people that settled it that are of color, which are not represented in our history books. I know that you may have been watching some of the, I can't remember the presentation on our K2WU that is talking about African American history, and they were saying that, like 2/3 of the cowboys that worked on the Great Plains and ranching were of minority, either black or Hispanic. So, that perspective is not communicated through our media yet. One reason I became really fascinated with Nicodemus, I was working as a cultural landscape specialist in the regional office in Omaha, and one of my assignments was to be a member of general management planning teams as new parks were brought into the National Park Service. And we have to do a management plan to say this is how we're going to meet the congressional intent for the historic site and help convey the history. And I was assigned to that team, and I started really making a lot of personal connections to the story because of how important it is for the people that settled here. They have an incredible link between their family and land ownership, which of course, makes total sense. And if you are trying to determine your own fate, make your way in the world, in the 19th and 18th and 19th century, land ownership was the base that you did that off of. And coming out of slavery and having this opportunity just really makes the families that settle in these communities across the United States. And do I have a controller for the thing? But anyway, it makes it really, people are so emotionally attached to the land that it's hard to buy land in Nicodemus, because you could see a lot of land that has 14 owners on it as it's passed down through the families.
Just go.
Just in context, of course, there were a lot of the things that motivated migration out onto the Great Plains, particularly by African Americans, which we'll be talking about. And, at the end of the Civil War, the United States was recovering through the Reconstruction Acts that were impacting the South. One of the main goals of any army that is trying to establish control of an area is to destroy the supply chains, the military or the manufacturing capacity of a region. And so, of course, the Union Army was very strategically targeting a lot of the railroads, a lot of the manufacturing buildings and stuff in the South. And so not only at the end of the Civil War was the federal government then focusing on physical reconstruction of the South, but they also were looking at the social reconstruction that they were trying to guide through the protection of rights for the freed African American people. There were a lot of advances made because of the law enforcement presence of the Union Army in the South, the right of people to go in and vote, to elect their own representatives, to establish, have all the freedmen schools, establish education for people of color. There was a huge gain by African Americans during the Reconstruction period. But as the country progressed further away from the end of the Civil War, there was a jading of our commitment to Reconstruction, and that's past. We don't want to talk about it, and then the South, as they were trying to recover and find labor to replace, they were reinstituting through some of the Jim Crow laws really negative impacts on the people of color that were still living in the South. And that basically generated a huge exodus out of the South. In particular, as President Hayes was elected, the election that saw President Rutherford B. Hayes elected in 1877, the vote was so close that there apparently was a deal made with the Southern Democrats that the federal government, Hayes would agree to pull the rest of the remaining federal troops out of the South, and then they would support his candidacy for president. So there was this push of increasing violence toward African Americans in the South. There was more church burnings, school burnings, lynchings, restrictive, what we call Jim Crow laws that restricted movement of African Americans, intimidation at the polls, all of that kind of thing was acting as a push to people who wanted to be free to participate in full citizenship. And at the same time, people were getting more information about the Homestead Act and the benefits of the Homestead Act that helped a lot of our ancestors settle out here on the plains. The people up at Homestead National Monument of America in Nebraska, which is a national park, argue that the Homestead Act was one of our first civil rights acts. It is a broad definition that the only criteria you had to meet, well, not the only, but the main criteria you had to meet to file a homestead was that you had to be a head of household. It did not define color, did not define citizenship, it did not define gender. So you have people of color, women, non-citizens, all taking advantage of the Homestead Act. And between approximately the end of 1877 and about 1880, there's an estimated 30,000 African Americans migrated out of the deep and upland South into primarily Oklahoma and Kansas, but there were settlements all up and down what was then, one of the western frontiers of our country. So they would come up the Mississippi River, debark from at St. Louis, come up the Missouri River, debark at Leavenworth, and actually come to Topeka, which was a huge resettlement center for the state of Kansas. So there, during this period, there were a lot of Christian relief societies that were sending money here to Kansas. There were congressional committees investigating all the people that were leaving the South, what's going to happen to the agricultural labor that needs the South. And in cities like St. Louis, Leavenworth, and Topeka were being overrun by not being able to provide social services and assistance to the people that were coming here. Often the former plantation owners would say, get off the land tomorrow morning. And that's it. They didn't have the chance to pull together hardly any property if they had much property to start off with. So it was something that Topeka became really instrumental in helping with the resettlement here in Kansas. And one of the efforts was to establish a community, and we think that Nicodemus is probably about the second community that was established specifically for and by African Americans in Kansas, but the other one did not last very long. So Nicodemus has the distinction of being the longest surviving African American town in what is now the Great Plains from the end of the Reconstruction period. So that's the reason that it was basically designated as a National Historic Site and that history was recognized. So in Topeka, there was a group of people, one white guy, W.R. Hill, Reverend Bell, and Reverend Samuel Roundtree. There were about 4 African American men that kind of met up and said, hey, let's take advantage of some of the laws that we have and start a town for African Americans and help promote settlement out on the Great Plains. So coming out of Topeka, they were going back to communities primarily in central Kentucky around Lexington, because that's where some of the people were from. And they had all these promotional posters. They were making speeches in churches and saying, come out to Kansas, the land of free soil. We have the reputation established as a free state from the Bleeding Kansas period. So they were promoting this settlement at Nicodemus, Kansas. They used not only the Homestead Act, which would get settlers land out in the county or the township surrounding the town, but they also used an act called the Township Preemption Act, which allowed speculators to file a claim on land specifically to turn it over and make a profit. That was one way that the federal government was working with railroads and to get settlement out to claim this portion of the country. So this is some of the resettlement posters and advertisements. They actually went into the churches around Lexington because Kentucky at that time had one of the Jim Crow laws that forbid gatherings of large groups of African American except at church. So that was one place that they could address and recruit a large number of settlers. So what they were promoting was interesting. So in one, specifically out of one of their recruitment posters, it says, by September 1st, which would be of 1877, the colony will have houses erected and all branches of mercantile business will be opened out for the benefit of the colony. A church edifice and other public buildings will be erected. Well, there was a first group that came out here, was a group of about 300 settlers from the Kentucky, Georgetown stamping ground area of central Kentucky. The railroad extended to Ellis, Kansas. They came out over the railroad they debarked and walked the 30 miles from Ellis to Nicodemus. And one of the women that came with this group, a similar sized group in the spring of 1878, Wilhelmina Hickman, this is what she saw. None of those promises had been made or had been kept. So they got out to the colony, and she says, all I could see was smoke coming out of the grounds because it was smoke from the dugout residences that had been built. They had to, it was really a hard way to make a living kind of thing. And it was just a real struggle. But the Hickmans, in fact, did stay and establish one of the churches there because Mr. Hickman was a reverend. But there were some of the original settlers that turned around immediately and came back to Topeka, and a few that even went on back to Kentucky because of the harsh conditions that they found. Well, this is no different than other people have experienced. I mean, this is our history of the settlement of the West, that these speculators were promoting all of these new great opportunities for people. But it's, that fact that African Americans are not given credit for their role in how we settled the West and expanded the United States. And that's, like I said, one of the primary reasons that Nicodemus is now designated as a National Historic Site. Initially, they lived in dugouts. Anywhere the land was sloped, you could dig back into the side of the slope and create a fairly livable conditions. They migrated to the sod houses, which were above ground sod, and then eventually, as lumber was available through more closer railroad connections, like at Stockton, they then could migrate to the frame houses. And by 1885, there was a fairly large population and a very booming business center in Nicodemus that served basically the entire region of northwestern Kansas for African Americans, at least as a social center, if not necessarily as a business center. Their population estimates for that period of time range from 500 to 700. We're not sure quite whether the census records are, we haven't done the research to differentiate between the population of the township, which was also Nicodemus, versus the town itself. But it was a booming town. But then, just like many of our early settlement towns, it was impacted by the fact that the railroad decided not to come through Nicodemus. They had money raised, they had made the commitment, they had been courting the railroads, but several of them declined that route and instead came through the area now that is Hill City, Kansas, which is the county seat. On top of that impact, of course, there were also the Depression that hit in the 30s. But continuing, there has always been some activity and people living in Nicodemus. And they have a really rich history. There still is one active church, the First Baptist Church, which is one of the 5 structures that's designated as part of the National Historic Site. It's still owned by the church. The school, this version of school was built in 1918, but they actually taught the first classes in a dugout in 1878. The Township Hall, which is a WPA project, that's another one of the National Historic Site structures. We leased that from the Township Board, and that's our current visitor center. But the thing that kind of acts as a glue to the community is the annual emancipation, or now what's called homecoming. And it is something more than just a family reunion, because it is multiple families coming back and celebrating their heritage. They celebrated, I think it was the 142nd or 141st homecoming celebration this past summer. There's anywhere between 400 to 1,000 people that will attend the celebration. So it's an incredible way to keep their history alive and active. But as you can see, the layout of Nicodemus in the density of structures has not really changed since the mid-50s. This is a 1990 photograph, but it's still fairly consistent with what was there in the 1950s. So it is, there are only about 25 people living there now. I think all but one is a direct descendant of the original settlers that founded the town. The National Park Service actually does not have any staff there on ground. At this point, we have a partnership with the local historical society where they are providing community interpreters to greet the people that come in to visit Nicodemus. And there are about 3,500 people that come off the interstate and deliberately come up to visit Nicodemus every year, which is kind of a low visitation, but it reflects the fact that it is a long ways off the interstate for someone that's traveling through the state of Kansas. And there aren't a lot of services up there to greet them. There's some efforts in the community. For a while when I was out there, there were some farmers trying out the viability of a new crop called teff, which is an Ethiopian grain. Unfortunately, all three of the farmers, Mr. Alexander, Ms. Valdale, and their cousin Gary Alexander are all deceased now. Edgar Hicks is a grain broker, or was a grain broker out of Omaha that was helping them. And then Earl Schweitzer, who integrated the K-State football team, he's now retired from farming. So there actually are no descendants that are actively farming the land now, which is a really sad commentary on the status of the community. The township board also, I'll mention, is trying, they got a grant to build some tiny homes because there is a little bit of land for sale, but like I mentioned, people don't want to let go of their family land, but there is a little bit of land, and with a tiny home, you're not making a big commitment to a retirement home in a place that is really a long ways from, you know, your closest VA hospital, you know, the airport and all that kind of stuff. We had done quite a bit of research out at Nicodemus. So we are focusing with, we're going to be rehiring staff and hope to have an independent visitor center built within about 5 years or so, if we can find the right donor. And we'll be integrating more of the stories and the source documentation that we have into our interpretation out there in that new visitor center. But one of the most significant things that people don't realize about Nicodemus, Kansas is it has one of the most unique collections of family photographs in the entire United States, and they are archived at the Spencer Research Library at KU. They have family photographs of the same family dating from the 1870s through today. And it is just that kind of resource for African Americans is just not known of really outside of Kansas. So I keep coming back to Kansas, and part of it is because of this really incredible history that we preserve and protect here. So thank you.
Don't be so quick to sit down, Sherda. As you remember that we have the books that go to Ross Elementary School. In honor of your speaking with us today, sign that. And then we have the 4-way coin, and I think you earned that today coming. Feel free to pass it on.
All right, thank you.
Okay. So, thank you very much. She did a great job for filling in at the last minute. We are here again next week, and our own new member, Tony Weingarter from KBI, will be talking about cybersecurity. And I don't know about you all, but I think it's a pretty scary topic, so looking forward to coming and speaking to you, Tony. With that, we will say the 4-way test. Things we say or do. Is it true? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned?
would be fun.
Have a great weekend.